At least that's the intro I was going to use until things got a little more complicated. But before we get to what may or may not have tried to light itself on fire, I should explain what prompted me to try to build a computer. Well, I already have a computer, but one day I was at Valley Village and I found a graphics card for $25. This was a R7 240 and it had 2 gigabytes of DDR3 memory. So not quite on the level of the card I normally run, but it meets the minimum specs for a lot of stuff, so it'd be interesting to try it out. So the idea I had was get a bunch of old components and just throw them together and have fun trying to run games on technically good specs, but very old hardware. Anyway, things got a little interesting. So, after shopping around on Facebook Marketplace for a bit, I bought an old Intel motherboard with a Core 2 Duo and 2 2GB sticks of DDR2 RAM for $20. I got a case for, I want to say 10, and a hard drive for 5, maybe 10. I probably should have wrote down the prices when I was doing this. And then for the power supply, I had a Thermaltake Smart 600 watt power supply that a friend donated to me after he upgraded. Thanks, Nick. Forgot to mention, I also ordered some SATA cables and a 3-pack of fans off of Amazon. As I was building this and putting everything together, things were relatively uneventful. I'd cleaned everything, so just had to get it together. Put some fresh thermal paste between the heatsink and CPU, seated the RAM, installed the video card, power supply, the regular stuff. The only slight sign of trouble occurred when I first powered on the computer, which for some reason the fan was flashing. Why is that flashing? No biggie, just switched from using the 4-pin connector to using a Molex power connector, and that fixed the problem. No speed control, but I'll take it. And then something else happened. At this point, I hadn't put the front panel on yet. I just wanted to check that it powered on, make sure everything was working relatively fine, and then I'd do that because I pulled all the cables out and it was going to be a bit annoying to put them back in, so wanted to make sure everything was good first. Yeah, did that, snapped that back into place, and then something started getting hot. Quite hot, actually. Yeah, so for some reason, the front panel audio managed to develop a short. It somewhat melted one of the wires. Alright, where is the audio connector? I'm not sure if this has showed up well on camera, but this, well, it used to be yellow wire here. If this doesn't show up, I'll put a photo of it. Tried melting itself. Well, it did try. It did. Yeah, so as I was trying to troubleshoot it, I noticed that this whole connector was very, very warm. And yeah, so that means that somehow it shorted out, which I think it somehow shorted through the case. This wouldn't be too big of a deal if the entire front panel I/O wasn't connected in a plastic bar, so I could just change out one of those easily. So, slight hiccup, I'm sure it won't get worse from here. As you can see, it says BIOS settings, press F2. If I do that, it just makes a beeping sound, which means something's up. I'm not sure what. The only thing I could think of is this keyboard does have a function lock button, which doesn't currently seem to do anything. Yeah, basically I'm just pressing everything in and all it's doing is beeping at me, so it's 6:40ish now. I think I might have time to make a run to Valley Village to see if I can pick up a old USB keyboard there, and hopefully that's the problem. Or at least find something. Yeah, this is an odd one. I'm gonna do a quick Google and hopefully find something. Yeah, it got worse. So, this motherboard was from 2007. And turns out that without a BIOS update, there was this neat little feature where you could run a PCIe graphics card into, say, a hard drive at the same time. Guess what I had? And even better, the end of life for this motherboard was 2019, so Intel had nothing on their site about it. Actually, I think I might have found something in the ROC database, but yeah, I couldn't find a BIOS update file or anything. Managed to eventually find a forum post with a link to the Wayback Machine, which had a snapshot that seemed to contain the right file, but that didn't work. I'm not sure if it was the wrong file, if I did something wrong updating. Let's just say there was a lot of things that could possibly go wrong, and I was just done with this motherboard at this point because everything was going wrong. Not to be deterred, I went back on Marketplace a few days later, and I eventually found a listing that had around 5 different computers in it. The guy selling didn't seem to know much about computers, didn't know the specs, but I managed to identify that one of them was more modern than the others based on the rear I/O of the computer. It had USB 3.0 HDMI DisplayPort for integrated graphics, so, you know, a step up from what I had that had no integrated graphics. Anyway, got in touch, and I managed to pick up a full computer minus a hard drive and graphics card for $40, which was a pretty good deal. If this listing had been up from when I started, I probably would have gone with this from the start, but it popped up a few days after I finished picking up parts. So, after a bit of cleaning and some reassembly, I installed the graphics card and hard drive, which were the only surviving parts from the first build alongside the power supply, which I upgraded. After this, I installed the 3 fans because this case now had room for all of them, and hey, this actually worked. Yeah, I kinda wish I'd done this from the start, but wouldn't be quite as interesting if I had now, would it? The other thing I did is, since I'd gone to visit my mum for a day, I picked up some parts while I was there. So, rather than use the 2 2GB sticks that were in the PC when I grabbed it, I installed 4 2GB sticks of ECC RAM I had for some reason. Yeah, I'm beginning to think I have way too many random computer parts just lying around. On the bright side, once I got it together and booted up, this thing looked fantastic. Especially with the lights off, where it looked absolutely evil. After this was all booted up and I'd sorted out a few minor tweaks, I invited Nick over for a LAN party. We played CSGO. It was pretty fun, though admittedly having an actual desk for the second person may have made things better, but that video is something else that'll come out later. Instead, let's take a look at game performance. I tested a few different games ranging from stuff I play a lot and wanted to see the results of, to stuff I don't play as often but thought might be taxing on the system and I wanted to see how it did. All of these games were run while OBS was screen capturing, so there was a slight performance hit, but just keep that in mind as I discuss this. Oh yeah, the other thing is I lost the original footage of the test, so I reran them recently. Only difference with the system is, as I'll discuss later, it now has 2 hard drives. And running at 1280 by 768, the native resolution of the display I was using. First up, we have Fallout 76. Menu screen. Running at 50-ish FPS up to near 60. Yeah, I had some connectivity issues during the first round of tests, so we ran a few. And yeah, interesting thing to note, according to Task Manager, this was completely maxing out the CPU, so yeah. The next game that actually ran was Astroneer. And depending on what settings I selected, ranging from high to low, it would run anywhere from 20 to like 28 FPS, so overall the settings didn't have that big of an impact. And for what the game is, I consider that fully playable. After this, I ran CSGO due to the mentioned connectivity issues. I did a bot match and messed around with settings. I was getting somewhere between 30 and 50 FPS, but it felt really smooth, and I'm fairly sure I could get that higher with some optimization and stuff. But yeah, stuff was just really weird during this test run, so let's just leave it there. Due to the issues and the fact that it was now 11 at night, I called it there and ran the next set of tests later on. starting with Rainbow Six Siege. After finding some settings that worked well and disabling stuff I didn't like, the game ran at somewhere in the 30 to 40 FPS range. Following this, I ran Primal Carnage Extinction. One game played along with Mike, had to restart the game a few times to apply settings and deal with some of the usual, let's say, glitchiness of Primal Carnage, but nothing too bad, and once I got into a match, the frame rate held at 23 to 28 FPS, and I know that sounds bad, but I actually found it pretty good. I did notice frame drops, it held constant in that range, and I was immersed enough in the game that I actually played it for like half an hour and forgot I was testing. Yeah, it is playable, and I think this comes down to the game itself. There's so much going on and so much information hitting your eyes that even with a slightly lower frame rate, you don't really notice that, and as long as you're not playing a class like Scientist or Pathy where you're trying to track and flick very fast, I think this is fine. And of the second set of tests, the last game I ran was Black Ops 3. And after changing some settings and making sure the resolution was correct, during the starting mission it ran between the high 30s and 50 FPS. And then I tested in split screen. This did not run nearly as well, and in the same mission it got somewhere from 10 to 30 FPS, which I didn't really notice because I was struggling to control two characters and move them around for testing. There was also two other games I tested, Valorant, which, while it ran fine once I was in-game, loading in had some serious issues to the point I was getting AFK warnings. And as for Apex Legends, turns out my CPU does not support supplemental SSE3 instructions, so it just won't run the game outright. Alright, I think I'm gonna wrap it up there. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought. This is my first time editing a video like this, so didn't entirely know what I was doing. Let me know how it turned out. Anyway, I think I will continue doing sporadic hardware videos. I don't really plan them, so whenever I come across something cool, it'll probably show up here eventually. Aside from that, yeah, stay tuned, and until next time, interactions exist.